The first offer arrived as a cashier's check, not a question. $900. Full settlement, land, stock, and structures. Wade Mercer had already signed the back. He pinned the check beneath a rusted horseshoe on Elena Ruiz's gate, leaned one forearm on the hood of his truck, and looked past her toward the 6 small cattle standing in the mesquite. "Cash it by noon," he said. "Tomorrow I start deducting what it'll cost me to haul those things away." Elena held the check between 2 dusty fingers. Behind Mercer, one of the cattle reached into a thorn bush and stripped a mouthful of leaves without flinching. 137 acres, a collapsed shed, a dry well, and 6 black, narrow-bodied cows the whole county called brush trash. $900 for all of it. Elena folded the check once, then again. Then she slid it beneath his windshield wiper. "You forgot something," she said. Mercer glanced at the check. "What?" "My signature." 3 months earlier, Elena had not known Cinder Wash existed. The deed found her in a 1-bedroom apartment above a tire shop in San Antonio, tucked inside an envelope from a probate clerk she had never met. She opened it at 2 in the morning after finishing a 12-hour dispatch shift. The paper said her great-aunt Inez Marquez had left her 137 acres in the western edge of the Llano Seco Basin. It also said the property carried 2 years of unpaid well fees, a delinquent equipment note, and an agricultural tax exemption that would expire if the land stopped qualifying as a working ranch. Elena read the deed twice. Then she searched the address. The satellite image showed a pale rectangle of land split by a dry arroyo. No trees large enough to cast real shade. No visible pond, no green anywhere. She had met Inez only once, at a funeral when Elena was 9. She remembered a square face, silver braids, and a voice that made adults stop talking. That was all. The estate lawyer told her the land had been offered to 3 relatives before her. All 3 declined. Elena almost did the same. She had $412 in savings. Her landlord had raised the rent. Her car needed a transmission. And she knew nothing about cattle except that they were heavier than people and often smarter about fences. Still, the deed remained on her kitchen table for 6 days. On the 7th, Elena packed 2 duffel bags, called in sick, then called again and quit. The road into Cinder Wash was 28 miles of pavement, followed by 11 miles of caliche and washboard. The farther west she drove, the more the country opened: low red hills, white sky, creosote, mesquite twisting out of the ground like black wire. She passed 3 abandoned windmills and a billboard advertising land for solar development. The last 2 miles were not on any road Elena could see. She followed tire ruts, through dust until the ranch appeared below her. The house was smaller than the probate photos. The roof had lost a section of tin. The porch leaned toward the south. A stone cistern sat open and empty beside the kitchen wall. The only thing on the property that did not look defeated was the fence, old, patched, ugly, but standing. Elena stopped her car on the rise. That was when she saw the cattle, 6 of them. They moved in single file along the arroyo, dark against the pale ground. They were not shaped like the broad, blocky beef cattle she knew from highway billboards. These were narrow through the ribs, long in the leg, with compact shoulders and pale horns that curved backward close to the skull. Their coats were black-brown, almost charcoal. Each animal had a light silver ring around the muzzle. They walked as if the heat belonged to them. Elena stepped out of the car. The lead cow stopped. She looked at Elena once, then turned toward a stand of prickly pear and began biting the fruit from between the spines. Elena watched her chew. "All right," she said. The cow kept eating. "That makes 1 of us." The first week taught Elena 3 things. The house had electricity only when the wind allowed the old turbine to turn. The well pump worked for 9 minutes before overheating, and the cattle did not need her nearly as much as she needed them to. She found 2 sacks of range cubes in the shed and poured some into a trough. The cattle sniffed them, walked around the trough, and went back to browsing mesquite pods. She carried water in 5-gallon jugs from a cooperative tap 17 miles away. Most mornings, the cattle drank less than she expected. Then they vanished into the brush and returned near sunset with dark mud on their hooves, though Elena had not found a wet place anywhere on the property. On the 5th day, she followed them. They led her half a mile into the west pasture, down a slope hidden by greasewood and into a narrow cut where the air felt cooler. At the bottom, beneath a shelf of limestone, water trembled in a depression no wider than a dinner plate. Not flowing, not standing, seeping. The lead cow drank twice, stepped away, and waited while the others took their turns. No pushing, no wasted movement. When they finished, they climbed out and began eating dry grass that looked dead. Elena knelt beside the seep. The mud was cold beneath the surface. She pressed her palm into it and felt the first thing on the ranch that did not feel like an ending. Cinder Wash had one gas pump, one feed store, one cafe, and a county office that opened when the clerk was available. Elena went into town because she needed a pump capacitor and because speaking to someone who was not a cow had started to feel medically necessary. The cafe was called the Blue Plate. 7 people looked up when she entered. 6 looked away. The 7th kept staring. He was a thick-necked rancher in his 50s with sunburned cheeks and a silver belt buckle wide enough to serve food on. "You're Inez's niece," he said. "Great niece. Close enough." The woman behind the counter set down Elena's coffee. "Dale," she warned. "I'm being neighborly, June." He turned back to Elena. "Dale Pritchard, North Bench Ranch." Elena nodded. "Those little black cattle still alive out there?" "All 6. Dale laughed once, not cruelly, worse than cruelly, automatically. "Inez kept those things like other people keep photographs, sentimental and useless." June placed a plate in front of Elena. "Eat," she said. Dale continued. "They don't finish heavy, don't grade well, won't behave in a feedlot. Meat buyers discount them before they step off the trailer." "What are they?" Elena asked. "Scrub cattle. That's a description. That's a verdict." A man at the back table chuckled. Elena cut into her eggs. "Who buys land around here?" The cafe changed, only slightly. A fork paused. June's eyes moved toward the front window. Dale leaned back. "Depends who's selling. I'm asking who's buying." That was when June said the name Wade Mercer. Dale looked at her. June shrugged. "She'll find out." Mercer owned the feed warehouse, the livestock hauling company, and most of the notes held against the smaller ranches in the basin. He did not own the bank. He did not own the water cooperative. He did not own the county commission. But Elena learned within a week that a surprising number of decisions in Cinder Wash passed through one of those places after first passing through Wade Mercer's office. He came to the ranch 2 days after her visit to the cafe. No appointment, no introduction. He drove through the gate while Elena was repairing the porch steps and parked close enough to throw dust across her tools. Mercer was 62, compact, clean-shaven, and dressed like a man who spent enough time around ranchers to copy the uniform without ever getting dirty in it. He looked at the house, the cistern, the cattle. Then he looked at Elena. "I made Inez 4 offers," he said. "She took none of them. She was old. She was still able to say no." A small smile touched his face. "You've got more spirit than cash." Elena stood. "You came here to count one of those? I came to save you 6 months of learning what everybody else already knows." He told her the well casing was failing. The western fence crossed an uncertain survey line. The grazing exemption required verified livestock production. The cattle had no registration papers. The equipment note would mature in 41 days. He knew every number. That was the first thing about Wade Mercer that frightened her. Not his confidence, his preparation. Then he produced the check, $900, full settlement. When Elena returned it beneath his windshield wiper, Mercer did not argue. He only looked toward the cattle. The lead cow was standing in the sun, chewing mesquite leaves. "She'll outlast your bank account," he said. Elena followed his eyes. "Maybe." Mercer opened the truck door. "But she won't pay it." He drove away. Elena stood at the gate until the dust settled. Then she walked to the shed and found Inez's records. They were not in ledgers. They were written on feed sacks, hundreds of them, folded flat and stacked inside a metal trunk. Dates, calf weights, rainfall, water haul mileage, notes about animals identified only by horn shape, muzzle color, or temperament. Crooked horn, calved after 47 days over 100 degrees, no assist. Silver mouth, held condition through 9-month dry cycle. Red ear, would not touch grain, gained on browse. At the bottom of the trunk lay a map drawn in blue pencil. Not a property map, a water map. Lines followed the arroyo. Circles marked limestone shelves. Small arrows showed where runoff moved after storms. One note had been underlined 3 times. The land hides water from people, which only look for ponds. Elena read it twice. Then she heard a voice behind her. "You found the feed sacks." She turned. A girl stood in the shed doorway, 14, maybe 15. Long brown braid, work gloves tucked into the waistband of her jeans. A cattle dog sat beside her with one torn ear. Elena picked up the nearest wrench. The girl looked at it. "You planning to throw that?" "Depends." "My name's Nell Baird. We're east of you." "That doesn't answer why you're in my shed." "I knocked. Your door doesn't shut right, so I figured you didn't hear." Nell nodded toward the map. My granddad helped Inez mark those seeps. Elena lowered the wrench.
Your granddad's still alive? He says so.
Abel Baird lived in a trailer beneath a cottonwood that had no business surviving in cinder wash. He was 84 years old, nearly blind in one eye, and perfectly capable of telling Elena within 30 seconds that she had tied her horse hitch wrong even though she did not own a horse. Nell brought her there that afternoon. Abel listened while Elena described the cattle. 6 animals, black-brown coats, pale horns, silver muzzles. He asked about the width of their hooves, the angle of the ribs, and whether the lead cow drank before or after the others. Elena answered what she could. Abel leaned back. Inez kept the Monte cattle. That's a breed? It used to be. He pointed toward a shelf crowded with rusted cans, manuals, and rolled maps. Nell pulled down a wooden box. Inside were photographs wrapped in wax paper. Small dark cattle stood beside vaqueros, sheep herders, and children in images taken decades apart. Some photos were brown at the edges. One had a date written on the back, 1948. Another had no date but showed a wagon with wooden wheels. Abel touched the photograph. Ganado del Monte, he said. Cattle of the brush. Spanish families brought pieces of those bloodlines north. Ranchers crossed them, traded them, kept what lived. Why have I never heard of them? Because they were slow. He said it as though the word explained a century. Feedlots reward speed, big frames, fast gain, uniform carcasses. These cattle were built for the opposite. They took their time, walked farther, ate rougher plants, calved small, stayed alive when the country got mean. Nell sat on the floor, listening even though she had clearly heard this before. Abel looked at Elena. Your aunt didn't preserve them because she was sentimental. Then why? Because they paid their own way in years when everything else needed to be rescued. Elena thought of Mercer's words. She'll outlast your bank account, but nobody will buy them. People buy what the market knows how to measure. Abel tapped the old photograph. That's not the same as value. Before Elena left, Abel handed her a narrow notebook bound with cracked rawhide. Inside were 43 years of breeding notes, not complete, not official, but specific: calving intervals, heat losses, hoof problems, water use, body condition through dry cycles. One entry from 1982 recorded a herd of 21 animals surviving 11 months on brush pasture with no grain and less than half the water allocated to neighboring cattle. Another recorded 3 calves born during a freeze with no assistance. The final pages contained Inez's handwriting. 6 cows remaining, 2 possibly bred, 1 young bull, sound. Do not break the group unless the line can continue elsewhere. Elena closed the book. Did she know she was dying? Abel stared toward the trailer window. Inez knew most things before other people admitted them. He looked back at Elena. She also knew Mercer was waiting. Why? Because this ranch is the last private strip between his south parcels and the county road. So he wants access. He wants control. Abel's voice hardened. And those cattle complicate his favorite story. What story? That dry land has only one ending. For the next 19 days, Elena treated Inez's records like instructions left by someone who expected to be ignored. She walked the property at dawn. She measured the seep with a marked stick. She traced every arrow on the blue pencil map. Nell came after school and corrected Elena's fence knots without being invited. The dog, whose name was Gus, followed the cattle and returned covered in burrs. By the end of the second week, Elena had located 3 water points. The first was the limestone seep. The second was a shallow pocket beneath the arroyo gravel that held water 2 feet below the surface. The third was not water at all. It was a natural basin of hard clay where runoff had once collected before a bulldozer cut a drainage path through it. Elena stared at the old cut, then at Inez's map. Then she rented a compact excavator she could not afford and spent 2 days rebuilding the basin. The machine stalled 6 times. The hydraulic line leaked. She watched instructional videos at night beneath a battery lantern, then tried again in the morning. When she finished, the basin looked unimpressive. A shallow depression, a low earthen lip, a stone spillway. Nell stood beside her. That's it? That's it. It looks like a mistake. Good, Elena said. Maybe Mercer won't notice it. The veterinarian arrived in the 3rd week. Dr. Priyanand worked 3 counties and carried enough mud inside her truck to establish a separate ecosystem. She had seen photographs of the cattle before coming. The photographs had made her curious. The animals made her quiet. She examined the lead cow for almost an hour. Teeth, hooves, eyes, rumen movement, skin, heart. She took measurements across the pelvis and shoulders. then stood back and watched the cow cross the slope. "What do you feed them?" she asked. "Whatever they find. Supplement? 2 range cubes each last week." They were offended. Dr. Nand almost smiled. The lead cow stopped beneath a mesquite tree and began eating seed pods from the ground. "She's at least 11, the veterinarian said. Elena looked at her. "She doesn't look 11, that's the point." Dr. Nand opened her notebook. "Her teeth are worn but evenly. Hooves are exceptionally hard. No sign of heat stress. Heart rate is lower than I expected in this temperature." She turned toward a smaller cow with a white mark on one ear. "That one is pregnant." Elena's breath stopped. "How far?" 4 months, maybe 5. Dr. Nand pointed to another. "And I'd test her too." Elena looked at the 6 animals. The number had always felt small, now it felt temporary. Dr. Nand drew blood from 4 of them. Not for anything official, not yet. She said she knew a range livestock researcher who collected data on unregistered local lines. She asked permission to send the samples. Elena agreed. Then Dr. Nand leaned against the truck door and lowered her voice. "Who knows you have them? Everyone who thinks they're worthless. That answer may change." "What do you mean?" "I mean animals that hold condition on this country in this heat with this little water are not curiosities." She closed the notebook. "They are information." Wade Mercer returned 6 days later. This time he brought no check. He brought a printed offer in a blue folder. $8,000. Cash. He would assume the equipment note, clear the well fees, and give Elena 30 days to leave. He stood beneath the porch roof while a dust storm built over the western hills. "You've improved the appearance," he said. "I moved 3 piles of scrap." "Appearance." Elena read the offer. "What changed?" "I prefer to close cleanly." "You were prepared to close for 900. "I was prepared to relieve you of a liability before you invested more money in it. And now you've invested more money in it. That makes it worth more to you. It makes you harder to move." The first gust struck the house. Tin rattled on the roof. Mercer glanced toward the pasture. The 6 cattle were walking into the wind, heads low, unhurried. "I know you had a veterinarian out," he said. Elena looked up. "Do you also know what she ate for lunch?" "I know what happens in my basin." "Your basin. You understand what I mean." "No," Elena said. "I understand what you said." The dust thickened between them. Mercer removed his hat and held it at his side. 8,000 is more than this place will produce for you in 5 years. You don't know what it produces. I know the rainfall. I know the carrying capacity. I know the market. You know the market you use." Mercer's expression changed by almost nothing. That was enough. Elena closed the folder and handed it back. "No. Your note matures in 16 days. I know. The well board meets next Thursday. I know. The exemption inspection is in October. I know." Mercer took the folder. "You've learned quickly. I had a good map." For the first time, he looked directly at the cattle instead of past them. Then he put on his hat. "Maps tell you where water was," he said, "not where it will be." The dust swallowed his truck before he reached the road. The equipment note was $4,600. Elena had $781 left. The excavator rental had been a mistake in every financial sense and a necessity in every other one. She called the lender. They offered a 30-day extension with a fee that made her laugh once before realizing they were serious. She called the cooperative. They could not advance anything against the cattle because the animals had no recognized market classification. She called 3 livestock buyers. One offered slaughter price by estimated weight. Another said he would take them if Elena paid transport. The third asked for photographs, then never called back. That night, Elena spread Inez's feed sack records across the kitchen floor. The cattle had survived, that was clear. But survival was not cash. Mercer understood that difference better than anyone. Nell came the next morning and found Elena at the table with the note, a calculator, and a cup of coffee gone cold. "My dad says you're going to sell." "Your dad has an impressive rumor service. He says nobody takes on Mercer with less than $1,000. I have less than $1,000. I know." Elena looked at her. "You always this comforting." "No." Nell set a paper grocery bag on the table. Inside were 23 envelopes, cash, checks, 1 folded money order. Elena stood. "What is this? People who owed Inez. For what?" Nell shrugged. "Water hauling, calf pulling, fence work. She loaned Mrs. Haskell money when the freezer broke. She bought hay for the church lot during the winter storm." Elena counted. $2,140. "Nell, I can't take this. It's not charity." "It looks like charity in 23 envelopes." "It's debt. Who collected it?" "My granddad made calls." Elena closed her eyes. I didn't ask him, no. He said that's why he did it before you could. Elena looked at the names on the envelopes. Some were people who had barely spoken to her. One was Dale Pritchard, $300. Across the front he had written, "For a water tank, 2019. She would not let me forget it." Elena laughed despite herself. Then she cried once, sharply, angrily, and wiped it away before Nell could decide what to do with it. The money was still not enough. But it changed the number. So Elena sold the only thing on the ranch with a recognized market, the old flatbed trailer. A contractor from 2 towns over paid $2,800 and hauled it away that afternoon. Elena paid the note with 1 day remaining. Mercer learned before the receipt had cooled. Of course he did. His message contained 4 words. That bought you time. Elena stared at it, then she deleted it. Summer arrived early. By May, daytime temperatures crossed 100 degrees. By June, the weather station had recorded less than 3 inches of rain in 10 months. The county declared a severe moisture deficit. The water cooperative reduced allocations. Hay climbed to $260 a ton. 3 ranches began hauling cattle east. 2 listed land. Mercer's trucks appeared on the road almost daily, sometimes carrying cattle, sometimes fencing supplies, sometimes nothing Elena could identify. The Monte cattle changed their schedule. They moved before sunrise, rested through the hottest hours, browsed again after dark. Elena followed them with a headlamp turned off. They used moonlight better than she did. They did not go to the same water point every day. They rotated. The limestone seep, the gravel pocket, a cluster of prickly pear heavy with moisture, a shaded bank where roots held damp soil below the crust. They were not merely surviving on little water. They were spreading their use so no single source failed. Elena began copying them. She stopped filling 1 trough. She placed 3 smaller drinkers along their natural route. She built stone checks across shallow gullies. She covered the cistern. She diverted roof runoff through a sand barrel. Every change was small. Together they added up. After the first storm of the season dropped only a 1/4 inch of rain, the rebuilt basin held 11,000 gallons. 11,000. Elena stood at the edge while muddy water spread across the clay bottom. The basin had looked like a mistake. Now it looked like time. The first calf was born at dawn. Elena found the mother standing beside the basin, licking a wet black bundle that was already trying to rise. The calf was a heifer, silver around the mouth, pale horn buds beneath the skin. She stood in 27 minutes. Nell arrived before school and crouched outside the fence. "Did you weigh her?" 46 pounds. That's small. That's why the mother didn't need help. Nell wrote the number in a notebook Elena had given her. Name? Inez called them by marks. The calf had a thin white crescent over one eye. Moon, Nell said. Elena looked at the animal. Moon it is. Abel came 2 days later. He moved slowly with a cane and refused the folding chair Elena carried for him. He stood at the fence while the calf nursed. His mouth tightened. Nell looked away to give him privacy. Elena did the same. After a while, Abel said, "Your aunt thought that line was finished. She was wrong." No, he watched the calf. She was waiting to be proven wrong. Dr. Nand called the following week. The blood panel did not match any common registered breed. That alone meant little. Unregistered crossbred cattle could produce unusual results, but the mitochondrial markers clustered with Iberian-derived lines, while several heat response markers appeared in combinations the lab had not seen in their reference population. The researcher wanted more samples, pedigree records, photographs, water use observations. Elena wrote everything down. "How certain are they?" she asked. "They're not," Dr. Nand said. "Scientists dislike certainty before paperwork. What do they like? More paperwork." Elena looked at Inez's feed sacks stacked across the table. "I can provide that." "There's something else," Dr. Nand said. The researcher had compared the animal's body condition against regional forage and water availability. Based on standard cattle requirements, the herd should have lost significant weight. It had not. Moon's mother had carried and delivered a healthy calf while consuming an estimated 40% less hauled water than the county model predicted. Elena wrote the number 40%. "That doesn't make them magic," Dr. Nand warned. "I know. It may mean they use the landscape differently." "I know that too." Dr. Nand was quiet. "You've been watching." "Yes, keep watching." Wade Mercer's third offer was $32,000. He brought it in person. No buyer, no folder, just a single page. "Land and herd," he said. "You keep the house contents in your car." Elena did not touch the paper. "What did the lab tell you?" Mercer's eyes stayed on hers. Nothing. Then someone did. This is a business offer. 3 months ago you said the place could not produce $8,000 in 5 years. I have revised my assessment. Because you paid the note. Because you improved the water system. Because the county road expansion makes the parcel more useful. All true. Elena looked at the cattle. 7 now. Moon stood beneath her mother, asleep in the narrow shade. But none of that moves a number from 8 to 32. Mercer folded the paper. What number would move you? I don't have one. Everybody has one. Then mine hasn't introduced itself. He almost smiled. Your aunt used to say things like that. You knew her well? I knew her long. That's different. Mercer looked toward the earthen basin. You built that from her map. Yes, you understand the map is incomplete. I understand she expected me to think. He put the offer in his pocket. The drought is not close to finished, neither am I. This time when he left, he did not warn her. That frightened Elena more. The drought tightened in July. The county stopped calling it a deficit and began calling it an emergency. Private wells dropped, stock tanks cracked, creek beds became roads. The cooperative tap Elena used for hauling water limited each agricultural account to 600 gallons every 48 hours. Standard beef cattle could drink 20 gallons a day in that heat, sometimes more. 600 gallons was not a solution. It was an arithmetic problem with death at the bottom. The Monte herd used less, but the ranch was no longer carrying 7. The second pregnant cow delivered twins, 1 bull calf, 1 heifer, both small, both alive. 9 animals now, 9 mouths. 9 sets of tracks leading toward water Elena had to protect from heat, silt, evaporation, and the eyes of anyone who might decide it belonged to them. She installed locks on the cistern, then hated herself for doing it. Cal Baird arrived one evening after sunset. Nell's father had the narrow, worn face of a man who had spent years keeping problems private because privacy was the last thing he still controlled. He stood outside the gate. He did not enter until Elena opened it. My west well failed, he said. Nell was not with him. Elena understood why. How many head? 17. How much water do you have? 2 days if I cut them hard. Elena looked toward her basin. The storm water had fallen by half. The limestone seep remained active, but barely. The gravel pocket was damp, not full. Her calculations allowed for the Monte herd, household use, and a margin for another month of heat. They did not allow for 17 standard cattle. Cal removed his hat. I'm not asking for free water. What are you asking? A temporary line from your lower cistern. I'll pay for pipe, I'll meter it, I'll sign whatever you want. Elena thought of the number, 20 gallons per animal. 17 animals, 340 gallons a day. More in extreme heat. The cistern could not carry that. No, she said. Cal's face closed. Then Elena continued, not for all 17. He waited. You need to sell or relocate at least half. His jaw tightened. I came for water advice. You came because the math already gave you that advice. Those cows are my daughter's college. Then don't let them die because selling some feels like failure. Cal looked past Elena toward the dark pasture. You've been here 4 months. Yes. I've been on my place 26 years. I know. You don't get to tell me how to run it. No, Elena held his gaze. But you asked me how much water I have. I'm telling you exactly how far it goes. The heat hummed around them. Insects struck the porch light. Cal put on his hat. For a moment, Elena believed he would leave. Then he said, how many do I have to move? 8, 10 would be safer. He closed his eyes once. 10. I'll take water to 7 until October. You provide pipe and help me deepen the spill channel before the next storm. What storm? The one we build for before it exists. Cal looked at her. Then he nodded. He sold 10 cattle 3 days later. Mercer bought 6. A regional buyer took 4. Cal kept 7 breeding cows and 1 bull. He ran black pipe across the low ridge to Elena's lower cistern and installed a meter with a seal Elena could inspect. He wrote every gallon in a notebook. Nell came with him each morning. No one mentioned the argument at the gate. The arrangement saved the 8 animals he kept. It also told Cinderwash something Wade Mercer did not want it to learn. Elena Ruiz had water. Not much, but enough to share if the numbers were honest. The calls started. The Haskells needed 100 gallons for horses. The church lot needed water for 27 abandoned goats someone had left behind. Dale Pritchard asked whether Elena would sell him one of the Monte bulls if the twins stayed healthy. Bob Larkin wanted to know how she built the runoff basin. A woman from the southern bench asked if the cattle would eat saltbush. Yes, Elena said. How much saltbush? All the saltbush you wish they wouldn't. The woman laughed for the first time in weeks. Elena wrote down every request, every gallon, every promise. She refused more than she accepted. That was the hardest part. Generosity felt good for 10 minutes. Bad water math lasted for months. Abel made her repeat that sentence until she believed it. In August, Wade Mercer announced the cinder wash relief sale. Professional flyers appeared in mailboxes and under cafe doors. Discrest Livestock Purchase Day, immediate payment, no commission to sellers, free hauling. The event would take place at Mercer's loading yard on August 29th. The fine print said prices would be established by on-site condition assessment. Mercer controlled the assessors, the scales, the hauling, and the only shaded holding pens in 30 miles. Elena read the flyer at the feed store. June, the cafe owner, stood beside her. "People need the money," June said. "I know. He'll pay something. I know. You think they shouldn't go?" Elena folded the flyer. "I think they should know what he is buying. Cattle. Time." June waited. Elena looked through the store window toward the empty road. "He buys animals when the land can't carry them. Then he buys the land after the owners no longer have an agricultural operation. The cattle are the first signature." June's face changed. Not because she fully agreed, because she understood the shape. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet." Inez's feed sacks gave Elena the pattern. Dates of land transfers, names, Mercer offers, dry years, families who sold cattle first and acreage later. Abel supplied memory. June supplied rumors that became addresses. Nell rode her bicycle to ranches where adults spoke freely because they did not consider a 14-year-old girl part of the room. Within 9 days, Elena had a timeline covering 14 years. Mercer had acquired 8 parcels during or immediately after drought declarations. In 6 cases, Mercer's company had first purchased livestock or equipment from the owner. In 4, the land lost its agricultural exemption within 2 years. None of it was illegal. That was what made the pattern strong. It did not depend on a crime. It depended on people reaching the same exhausted point at different times. Mercer did not create the drought. He organized the surrender. Elena visited 7 ranches. She did not tell anyone to boycott the sale. She showed them the timeline. Then she showed them Inez's water map and explained the runoff basin. Most listened. 2 laughed. One man said he did not have the luxury of principles. Elena agreed. Another said Mercer had helped his family before. Elena agreed with that too. The truth was not cleaner because Mercer was dangerous. He had advanced feed, paid medical bills, covered hauling costs. He knew exactly how useful to be before becoming necessary. At Dale Pritchard's ranch, Elena found 23 cattle crowded around a nearly empty tank. Dale looked smaller than he had in the cafe. 7 are leaving for the sale, he said. Why 7? Because that buys hay for the other 16. Have you seen Mercer's condition schedule? No. Elena handed him a copy Nell had photographed through the loading yard office window. Cattle under a specific body condition score would be discounted 35%. Cattle from drought-declared zones would be discounted another 15%. Free hauling would be deducted if sellers rejected the final price. Dale read it twice. That's not on the flyer. No. He looked toward his herd. So what am I supposed to do? I don't know. He stared at her. I thought you came with a plan. I came with information. That's cheaper. Yes. Dale crushed the paper in one hand. Elena let him be angry. Then she said, I can sell you a young Monty bull next spring if the line holds. I can help you cut water loss now. I cannot make your hay cheaper by August. Dale looked at her. Then you're telling me to take his price. I'm telling you not to confuse a bad option with a dishonest choice. That answer surprised both of them. Dale went to the sale. He sold 5 animals, not 7. The money bought 6 weeks of hay. It was not a victory. It was enough. The relief sale moved 112 head. Mercer bought 68. Regional buyers took the rest. Prices were low, but not ruinous. Too many people were watching. Elena's timeline had traveled farther than she knew. Someone gave it to a reporter from the county agricultural paper. Someone else sent it to the state land office. Mercer made less money than he expected. He still gained 68 cattle and 3 equipment liens. He also gained public attention. For the first time in Cinder Wash, those 2 things arrived together. 2 nights after the sale, Elena's main well collapsed. The pump ran dry at 2:13 in the morning. She woke to the sound of metal hammering inside the casing, then a scream from the motor. By the time she killed the power, the pipe had buckled. At sunrise, the well contractor lowered a camera. The screen showed fractured casing, sediment, and a dark split 73 feet down. How long? Elena asked. To repair? Yes, 3 weeks if I can get material. How much? He wrote the number on the back of his glove box receipt. $12,800. Elena stared at it. That include the material? That includes me feeling sorry for you. The basin held less than 4,000 gallons. The lower cistern held 2,300. The seeps were weakening. Cal's line was still drawing water. 9 Monte cattle. 8 Baird cattle. House use. No functioning well. Elena sat on the porch after the contractor left and did the arithmetic. Every version ended before the repair date. Mercer arrived that afternoon. He parked outside the gate. This time he waited for Elena to invite him in. She did not. He walked to the fence and stood there. I heard about the well, your basin. He ignored the correction. I can have a crew here tomorrow. At what price? Sign a 6-month purchase option. I fund the repair. If you repay me by the end of the option, the land stays yours. And if I don't, I buy at the appraised value in the agreement. What value? 110,000. The number struck harder than the 900 had. Not because it was tempting. Because it was close to rescue. Close enough to sound responsible. Close enough that refusing it could be framed as pride. Mercer placed the agreement on the fence post. You keep the cattle during the option, he said. You continue the university testing. If the research becomes valuable, that helps your repayment. Elena looked at him. You know about the research. It's public enough, not all of it. No. He was honest about that. It made the offer worse. What happens to Cal Baird's water line? I fund a temporary tanker for his ranch. And the other people using the basin? The agreement concerns your property. That means they're gone. It means I'm not paying to rescue the county. Elena looked at the contract. Mercer lowered his voice. You are out of water. Not a threat. Not arrogance. A fact. Behind her, Moon called once. The sound was small. Mercer followed it with his eyes. Take the option, he said. You don't have to like me to survive. Elena left the contract on the fence. Then she walked the property until dark. The cattle had changed direction. Instead of moving west toward the limestone seep, they climbed the north ridge. Elena followed. The slope was steep and broken. At the top, the lead cow crossed onto a patch of ground Elena had mapped as useless. Hardpan, black rock, no visible forage. The cattle continued toward an old line of cottonwood stumps. Elena almost turned back. Then Moon disappeared. 1 second the calf was beside her mother. The next she dropped below the ridge. Elena ran. On the far side lay a narrow trench cut between basalt shelves. At the bottom, hidden beneath waist-high saltbush, stood a stone trough. Old, cracked, half-buried. Water glistened in it, not much, but moving. A thin thread entered through a clay pipe in the wall. Elena knelt and pulled brush from the inlet. The flow increased. Inez's blue pencil map had no mark there, but beneath the stone rim, Elena found letters carved by hand. A.M. Abel Marquez, her great-grandfather. The cattle had found a spring the family had forgotten. Elena tested the flow for 6 hours, 1.7 gallons per minute, 2,448 gallons a day. Not enough to waste. Enough to change the arithmetic. She returned to the fence after midnight. Mercer's contract remained beneath the stone. Elena wrote 1 sentence across the first page. The land is not out of water. Then she folded it and put it beneath his office door before dawn. The hidden spring did not solve everything. It solved the next day, then the next. Elena cleaned the trough, repaired the clay inlet, and ran a gravity line downhill into a covered tank. Cal Baird helped without asking whether she had accepted Mercer's deal. Nell mapped the flow every 4 hours. Abel sat in the shade and told them where the old pipe might turn beneath the rock. By the 3rd day, the spring was delivering almost 2,500 gallons in 24 hours. The Monte herd drank. The Baird cattle drank. The house had water again. Elena shut the broken well down and delayed the repair. She could not afford $12,800. She could afford patience. Dr. Priya Nand called on the 4th morning. The researcher from the State University wanted to visit immediately. Her name was Dr. May Chen. She arrived in a white truck carrying 2 coolers, 3 field cases, and the restrained excitement of someone trying not to frighten a discovery by naming it too early. She spent 2 days at the ranch. She measured forage, collected hair, timed drinking behavior, recorded body temperature before dawn and afternoon, compared hoof pressure on hardpan, photographed the silver muzzles. She asked Elena to walk her through every water point. At the hidden spring, Dr. Chen stopped. You didn't lead them here? They led me. All 9? The older cows first. The calves followed. Dr. Chen wrote for a long time. That evening they sat at the kitchen table with Inez's feed sacks spread between them. Dr. Chen read an entry from 1996, 38 days above 100, no grain. Cows held flesh. Calves light but active. Then another from 2004, water hauled every third day, not daily. Herd moved to Saltbush before sunrise. This is longitudinal data, she said. It's writing on feed sacks. It's consistent writing on feed sacks across 30 years. Elena looked at the stacks. Does that make them a breed? Not by itself. What does? Distinct genetics, stable physical traits, reproducible behavior, a documented population history. Do I have those? Dr. Chen did not answer immediately. The preliminary comparison suggests your cattle are not random crosses, she said. They carry a coherent cluster of traits that has persisted over generations. Meaning? Meaning the line is real. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, Elena felt fear. What happens when you put that in writing? The report becomes part of the university record. Public. Eventually. How eventually? Dr. Chen looked at the feed sacks. Sooner than you would prefer. Elena thought of Mercer's offers. 900. 8,000, 32,000, 110,000 hidden inside an option. What are they worth, she asked. As commercial beef cattle today? Yes. Not much. And as genetics? Dr. Chen's face became careful. That depends on whether the traits breed true at larger scale. Assume they do. I don't like assumptions. Try one. Dr. Chen folded her hands. Heat tolerance, browse conversion, low water demand, easy calving. If those traits are heritable and stable, operations in drought-stressed regions would care. How much? I cannot give you a number. Can Wade Mercer? No. That was not the answer Elena wanted. It was the answer that mattered. No one knew the ceiling. Mercer was not trying to buy a proven asset. He was trying to buy uncertainty before it became public. Dr. Chen filed the preliminary report on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, Elena received 11 calls. A conservation nonprofit, 2 universities, a genetics company, 3 cattle operators, a podcast producer, a man who introduced himself only as a private collector, a woman who offered $60,000 for 2 embryos before Elena explained that none had been collected, and Wade Mercer. His offer was $275,000. Land, herd records, water infrastructure, all research rights assignable to his company. He delivered the number over the phone in the same tone he had used for 900. Elena sat at the kitchen table. Outside, Nell and Cal were repairing the spring line. How long is the offer open? Elena asked. 72 hours. Why? Because uncertainty has value in both directions. You mean it could be worth less or more. You want the chance that it's more. I want an agricultural asset that fits my holdings. The cattle or the land? Yes. Elena looked at Inez's note. Do not break the group unless the line can continue elsewhere. What happens to the people using my water? That is not part of this offer. What happens to the breeding access? I would manage the line professionally. For whom? My operation. Then no. Mercer's breathing did not change. You did not ask for time. I don't need it. $275,000 is enough to rebuild anywhere. I'm not trying to rebuild anywhere. What are you trying to do? Elena looked through the window at the basin. For months, she had answered that question only in pieces. Pay the note. Find water. Keep the cattle alive. Stop Mercer from making the decision for everyone. Now the answer was larger. I want this line spread across enough working ranches that no one man can own its future. Silence. Mercer understood immediately. That will reduce its commercial value. It will reduce its monopoly value. You are not a non-profit. No, you have debt. Yes. You need a well. Yes. And you're prepared to give away the advantage that could solve all of it. I said spread, not give away. Mercer's voice cooled. You don't know how to manage intellectual property. They're cattle, Wade, not software. That is exactly why you need someone who does. Elena ended the call. Her hands shook after, not because she wanted the money, because some numbers are large enough to make conviction feel physically expensive. Dr. Chen referred Elena to an agricultural attorney named Marisol Pike. Marisol drove 3 hours from Albuquerque, wore dust-proof boots with a city suit, and did not react when Gus the dog slept on her briefcase. She listened, read the deed, reviewed the preliminary report, studied Inez's feed sacks. Then she asked the question Mercer had asked. What do you want? Elena gave the same answer. A distributed breeding network, local access, management standards, no single-owner bottleneck. Marisol wrote 3 words. Landrace superative. You can't patent naturally occurring cattle, she said. Not the animals themselves. There may be proprietary tests, semen processing, branded certification data rights, but ownership of the living line can be distributed by contract. How? Sell breeding groups with restrictions against immediate consolidation, require record sharing, create a cooperative registry. Keep enough genetic diversity across separate herds that no acquisition of one ranch controls the population. Elena leaned forward. Can we do that before the final breed recognition? Yes. Can Mercer stop it? He can buy from willing sellers. So the contracts matter. The relationships matter more. Marisol tapped the feed sacks. Your aunt kept this line alive because no system cared about it. You are about to invite systems in that can protect the cattle. She paused. It can also make them legible to people who extract value faster than communities can organize. Elena looked at the handwritten records. What do I do first? Choose the first people carefully. Dale Pritchard became the first member. No one expected that, least of all Dale. He arrived at Elena's ranch after dark with his hat in his hands, and the particular expression of a man who had practiced an apology in the truck and lost the words at the gate. I called them scrub trash, he said. You did. I laughed. You did. I was wrong. Elena waited. Dale looked toward the pasture. I need a bull. You asked in spring. I'm asking differently now. What can you support? 4 cows and 1 bull on the south section if I change the water layout. I've been watching what yours do. What have you changed? He listed it. Smaller, troughs, multiple browse areas, shade timing, no grain, rest periods after grazing. His answers were not perfect. They were specific. Elena sold him the young bull and 2 heifers on a 4-year payment plan. The price was fair, not cheap, not speculative. The agreement required weight records, calf records, water use notes, and first refusal to the cooperative if Dale ever sold. He signed every page. Then Elena made him say the breed name correctly. Ganado del Monte, he said. Again, he glared at her. She smiled again. Cal Baird became the second. The Haskell sisters became the third. A young Navajo ranching couple north of the basin became the fourth after Dr. Chen confirmed their land and management plan fit the line. Within 6 months, the cattle would exist on 5 separate properties. Not enough for safety, enough to make one purchase more difficult. Mercer reacted through paperwork. The water cooperative notified Elena that use from the hidden spring might exceed her historic allocation. The county requested a review of the ranch's agricultural classification. A survey company disputed access along her eastern fence. None of the notices carried Mercer's name. All arrived within 12 days. Marisol read them at Elena's table. He is making you spend attention, she said. What does that cost? Everything if you let it. The spring claim was weakest. No recorded right appeared in Elena's deed. The stone trough proved old use, not legal ownership. If the cooperative ruled the spring part of a shared groundwater system, Elena could face limits or fees. The review hearing was set for November 7th. Elena brought evidence, Inez's maps, the carved initials, flow measurements, historic photographs, Cal's meter records, Dr. Chen's land use analysis. Abel Baird arrived in a pressed shirt and testified that he had repaired the spring pipe with Inez's father in 1959. The board attorney asked how he could remember the year. Abel said, because the Dodgers had just moved to Los Angeles, and my brother would not stop complaining. 3 people in the room laughed. The attorney did not. Then, June from the cafe testified that Inez had supplied emergency stock water during 2 previous droughts. Dale testified that Elena's sharing agreement had prevented him from selling an additional 11 cattle. Cal testified that the water line was metered and temporary. Nell submitted 41 pages of daily flow data in handwriting more precise than the county's printed report. The board upheld Elena's use. Historic beneficial use, documented conservation, no evidence of waste. The ruling was narrow. It was enough. Outside the county office, Mercer stood beside his truck. He had attended the hearing without speaking. Elena walked past him. You built a room before I noticed, he said. She stopped. What? A room full of people willing to repeat your version. Elena looked at the courthouse doors, one behind her. It isn't my version if they lived it. Mercer's jaw shifted. You think this makes you safe? No. What does it make you? Elena looked toward Nell. Cal, Dale, June, and Abel standing together in the parking lot. Harder to isolate, Mercer nodded once. That was the moment Elena knew he had finally understood the real threat. It was not the cattle, it was not the spring, it was not even the public report. It was the fact that the line no longer had a single point of failure. The final report arrived in January, 186 pages. Genetic comparisons. Heat response data, forage analysis, hoof structure, calving records, water use estimates. The conclusion occupied 4 paragraphs. The Monte cattle represented a distinct stable landrace descended from old Iberian and borderland stock, preserved through long isolation and selection under severe brush country conditions. Their measured water use was 36 to 43% lower than comparable regional beef cattle under the study conditions. Their body temperature recovery after peak heat occurred faster. Their calves were lighter at birth, but reached survival benchmarks with fewer interventions. The traits were not magic, they were adaptation. A National Livestock Conservancy accepted the line for provisional heritage recognition. The university registered the working name chosen by the cooperative, Ganado del Monte, cattle of the brush. The news spread beyond Cinderwash, then beyond New Mexico. Elena received offers from operations in Arizona, Texas, Nevada, and northern Mexico. Some were sincere, some were ridiculous. One company proposed buying exclusive semen rights for 10 years. Another wanted to rename the cattle after a private brand. A television producer asked whether Elena could make them look more ancient for a camera segment. She declined all 3. The cooperative approved 11 new breeding placements. Not every applicant qualified. The cattle needed room to range. Mixed browse, distributed water, people willing to observe before interfering. That last requirement eliminated more applicants than the acreage did. Elena repaired the old well in stages. New casing first, pump later. She paid with breeding income, consultation fees, and a university stewardship grant. No option contract, no emergency buyout, no single check large enough to erase the reason she had stayed. Wade Mercer did not disappear. Men like Mercer rarely disappear, they adjust. He bought a remnant group of 24 cattle from an estate in southern Arizona after the owner's family saw the national report. The animals were related to the Monte line, not identical, close enough. Mercer moved them to his largest property and managed them like every other commercial herd he owned. Central trough, scheduled feeding, high-protein supplement, tight rotation, minimal roaming. Within 3 weeks, 5 stopped gaining. 2 developed severe hoof inflammation. 1 cow repeatedly broke fence to reach a saltbush flat outside the managed pasture. Mercer's crew increased the grain. The animals got worse. He came to Elena's ranch on a gray morning in February. He parked at the road, closed the gate behind him, knocked on the door. All 3 things were new. Elena poured coffee and waited. Mercer sat at the same table where Marisol had written Landrace Stelwip Cooperative. He looked older than he had in August, not defeated, tired. "I need you to look at a herd," he said. "Which herd?" "You know which. The Arizona cattle." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Your rumor service is improving." "My basin," he almost smiled. Then the expression vanished. "I'm losing condition on them. My vet says nutrition. We increased nutrition. That may be the problem." "They're cattle." "Yes. They require protein, water, minerals." "Yes." "So explain why providing more of all 3 makes them worse." Elena put down her cup. "Because you removed choice." Mercer waited. "These cattle are not built to stand at one source and consume what you deliver. They spread intake, browse, walk, select plants at different times of day, use shade in patterns. They regulate themselves through movement. They're expending calories. They're avoiding stress. I can manage heat. You can manage air temperature. You can't manage their decisions for them." Mercer's face hardened. "That sounds convenient. It also sounds like the reason one of your cows keeps breaking fence to reach saltbush." He looked at her. Elena continued. "Open the west pasture. Shut off the grain for a week. Leave minerals in 2 locations, not 1. Give them access to brush. Follow them before sunrise. Do not drive them. Write down where they go. That's your recommendation? That's the beginning. And your fee?" Elena had thought about this call before it came. Not because she wanted Mercer to fail, because she knew he would eventually encounter something he could not force into his system. "My fee is your data," he frowned. "Daily water, weight, treatment, forage use, calving. Everything for 3 years, shared with the cooperative and the university. That data has commercial value. Yes, you want it for free. No, you want my knowledge. That also has commercial value." Mercer sat back. "What else?" "Your company does not file an exclusive breed mark, proprietary landrace claim, or closed registry based on those animals. You cannot stop me from branding my own program. I'm not trying to. Brand your beef. Brand your ranch. Do not brand the existence of the cattle as if you invented them." Mercer was quiet. Outside, the Monte herd crossed past the kitchen window. 14 animals now. Moon was nearly grown. She moved behind the old lead cow with the same measured stride. "You planned for this," Mercer said. "I planned for somebody to need the answer, and you knew it might be me. I knew control would eventually meet something it couldn't improve. That landed." Mercer looked at the table, then he nodded. "Send the agreement." Elena visited his property 2 days later. The Arizona cattle stood around the central trough, restless and overfed. Their pasture contained cut hay, clean water, and almost no decision left to make. Mercer opened the west section. The cattle moved within minutes, not running, not panicked. They walked past the hay and into rabbit brush. By afternoon they had spread across the slope. The fence-breaking cow never approached the fence. Within 10 days, feed intake dropped. Water use stabilized. The hoof inflammation eased. Mercer's crew stopped calling them difficult and started calling them different. That was not redemption, it was accuracy. Elena accepted it. The rain came in March, not enough to end the drought. Enough to change its direction. Water struck the metal roof for 6 hours. The stone checks slowed the runoff. The rebuilt basin filled. The hidden spring ran clear. Cal's temporary line stayed in place until his repaired well recovered. Then he rolled the pipe, cleaned it and stacked it beside Elena's shed in case someone else needed it. Nell turned 15 and began keeping the cooperative records after school. Abel complained that the forms used too much paper and then filled out every line. Dale's first Monte Cross calf arrived on a cold morning without assistance. He called Elena at 5:40 a.m. He tried to sound calm. He failed completely. 3 years later, the cooperative counted 79 breeding animals across 12 working ranches. 41 calves had been born. 38 survived to weaning. During 2 additional heat emergencies, the participating herds used an average of 39% less hauled water than neighboring conventional herds of similar size. No adult Monte cow died from heat or drought. The numbers did not make anyone rich overnight. They did something more useful. They kept producing. Dale rebuilt his herd without selling land. Cal kept Nell's college account intact. The Haskell sisters stopped hauling water every day. The young ranchers north of the basin developed a brush grazing plan that restored sections of overgrown range while supporting cattle. Elena paid off the well repair, then the water fees, then the roof. She never became the sole owner of a priceless breed. That was the point. One spring morning, Elena walked the north ridge before sunrise. The basin below was green in patches. Not lush, cinder wash would never pretend to be generous. But grass had returned along the spill channels. Mesquite carried pods. The arroyo held a thin line of water beneath the stones. From the ridge, Elena could see lights at the Baird place, Dale's truck near his south pasture, and 3 Monte cows moving along the Haskell fence. The cattle no longer existed in one pasture. No drought, buyer, lawsuit, accident, or bad year could erase the line with a single loss. Nell came up the ridge behind her, carrying 2 notebooks and complaining about a broken gate latch. "You're going to need another bull group," she said. "Good morning to you too." Morning. They stood together as the sun reached the basin floor. Below them, the old lead cow moved toward the limestone seep. Moon followed with a calf of her own. Elena remembered the first day, the empty cistern, the broken roof, the $900 check. Mercer had looked at the ranch and seen a dry rectangle between 2 parcels. The cafe had looked at the cattle and seen carcass weight. The market had looked at them and seen everything they failed to become. Inez had looked longer. Abel had looked backward. Nell had looked closely. Elena had learned to do all 3. The lesson was never that worthless things become valuable when the right expert arrives. The cattle had not changed. The land had not suddenly hidden more water. The old records had not become true because a university printed them. The value had been working the entire time, quietly, slowly, outside the measurements built to ignore it. Cinder wash had never been empty. People had simply been measuring the wrong things.